Alright, so that Final Fantasy VII Rebirth hype train with the director, Naoki Hamaguchi, just keeps on chugging along, as the man has done more interviews talking about the lack of DLC for Rebirth, as well as hopefully bringing 7 Remake to the Xbox, and also the future of Final Fantasy. Not just the future of FF7, but the future of Final Fantasy, and how maybe him and his team could potentially take over the series in the future. So if any of that sounds cool to you, feel free to click the like button, and if you're new here and you'd like to stick around and help support the channel, you can subscribe, and as always, leave your thoughts in the comments down below. So like I mentioned before, it is award season, and Rebirth has been nominated for a plethora of awards at a plethora of different award shows. And it's so cool to see this because it's just nice to see Rebirth really kind of get that recognition and love, not only from game critics, but from gamers in general, from fans, because as a content creator that covers a lot of things, but primarily focuses on Final Fantasy, I tend to see a lot of negativity surrounding, 16 or the 7 Remake trilogy in particular. And I think when we focus so much on that aspect of the community and social media, it can kind of create this picture that more people dislike the Remake trilogy than we think. And if you take a step back and you see all the love and recognition that Rebirth in particular is getting at these award shows, and just from, general audiences, it's like, oh, more people are actually enjoying this than we thought. Like, Rebirth won Best Storytelling at the Golden Joystick Awards, which again is fan voted, but to see that there are fans out there that actually are enjoying the story, the way it's being told, and like the ending like I do, even though it is messy, it's just nice. It's cool. It kind of clarifies things a little bit. So to see Rebirth just doing really well and getting that love is cool. And speaking of awards, it's been nominated for more awards at other award shows across the planet. There are the Latin American Game Awards known as Equinox, which has given Rebirth 6 nominations. There's also the Grand Game Awards, which is really cool because Rebirth got 18 nominations at this award show, and what I love is that in their Best Performance category, not only is Brianna White nominated for her portrayal of Aerith, but Britt Baron is also nominated for her role as Tifa. So again, I'm a big fan of all of these people who voice these characters, but to see Britt in particular finally get some recognition for Tifa is super cool. And I think that she and Cody in particular will get their flowers for Remake Part 3, because Tifa is going to have a lot to do in Remake Part 3, and I think Britt is definitely up to the task when it comes to performing all of that. So it's just cool to see all the love flying around. I wanted to include that in there just to kind of focus a little bit more on the positive stuff. It's awesome. So moving over to those interviews with Naoki Hamaguchi, starting off with the lack of DLC for Rebirth. Now what's kind of interesting about this topic is that it's technically old news. We covered this a very long time ago. I believe it was the summer of last year where the devs told us straight up, Rebirth will not have any DLC. But it's making the rounds again because Hamaguchi kind of expands on why they decided to skip out on DLC and just go straight to Remake Part 3. And to get the answer to that, we have to unfortunately go to the Daily Star. But thankfully, Eurogamer has saved our butts and have transcribed the interview, so we no longer have to go to that hellscape of a website that nearly killed my phone and my spirit. So thank you, Eurogamer. You guys are the best. So Hamaguchi goes on to say, we definitely do hear the desire from fans, the voices out there that want that kind of thing. I understand it completely, but I think, from my perspective, what the fans really want to see the most is not necessarily DLC. They want to see the third part of the series as quickly as possible. So that's why we've decided not to focus the dev resources on creating additional extra episodes for DLC at the moment. We really are putting all our efforts into getting the third game out as quickly as we can. So for the moment, that's where we're focusing our time. Again, Hamaguchi just gets it. He completely understands where I'm at. I just really want Part 3 as soon as they can possibly get it out in the best condition possible, DLC would have been cool. It would have been nice to kind of have something to hold us over until we got to Part 3, and there's a number of things you could have done. We've talked about in the past of how you could have done a DLC, an intermission style DLC rather, for a character like Vincent. Tell the story of how Vincent joined Shinra, became a Turk, all the way until the end where he ends up in the basement of the Shinra Manor inside that coffin, and let us see what his relationship is to people like Hojo, the Turks, Lucrezia, Valencia, Sephiroth. So you could have easily done DLC focusing on that, but I think we're going to get all of that good stuff in Remake Part 3 anyway, because Vincent is technically new to the party. He's going to be playable for the first time, and they're going to need time to expand on him as a character and give us his backstory, especially considering how interwoven he is with this story and someone like Sephiroth. So we're going to get all that good stuff in Part 3. Now, when it comes to Cid, you could have done DLC focusing on Cid as well, but again, it makes more sense to do all of that in Remake Part 3. And how do you do that? So we've speculated in the past that it would be really awesome if they open up Part 3 with young Sephiroth. Let us do maybe 30 minutes to an hour tutorial style, playing as a young Sephiroth all the way up to when he becomes that war hero in Wutai. Give us kind of like a crash course on who Sephiroth is and what he's been through and kind of why he is the way that he is. And then after that ends, we inevitably will go back to the party, but where's the party going to be at? And for me, it really does make sense that they stop at Rocket Town. So you can open up the game with Sephiroth, and then we jump over to Rocket Town with that party, and we get to see how Cid's been living. How has the failed space program with Shinra affected him? What's his life like in Rocket Town? What's his relationship like with, you know, the people around him? So we're going to get all that good stuff with Cid also in Part 3. So as cool as it would have been to have something to tide us over, we're going to get all the good stuff in Part 3 anyway. And for them to realize, like, yeah, people really want that next part. Let's not waste time and money doing the DLC. Let's just get to Part 3 as soon as possible. So that's great. Now, speaking of Part 3, let's also talk about the PS5 Pro and Hamaguchi's thoughts on how it's kind of improved Rebirth as a whole. And for this, we are still sticking with Eurogamer. So Hamaguchi goes on to say, I think certainly that was one of the problems with using the PS5 base hardware, is that to try and get 60 frames per second output with the same level of graphic fidelity and resolution as you have in the graphics mode was something that was just really, really difficult to achieve. But certainly using the PSSR technology within the Pro, that really did allow us to do both at once and achieve both of those goals of the frame rate together with the resolution. I remember when I saw it for the first time, I was really blown away by it. So this is kind of an interesting thing because there are some devs out there that have really kind of tapped into the power of the base PS5. You look at Guerrilla Games and what they've been able to do with the Horizon franchise. The final boss battle in the Burning Shores DLC for Horizon is insane. You're fighting a gigantic spider boss that is the size of a building, and it looks and performs incredibly well. There's barely any slowdown or frame rate drop. So some devs out there just know how to work this machine. You can say the same thing about Sony Santa Monica in the God of War games, Sucker Punch with Ghost of Tsushima, but some of the third-party people out there kind of seem to be struggling a little bit when it comes to getting their games to run properly and optimization, and Rebirth is no stranger to that. The base version of Rebirth obviously has a lot of texture pop in, the foliage doesn't move around, lighting is a little bit weird in some spots, and when it came to the performance mode, the 60 frames was great, but the visuals themselves were super blurry. If you wanted that high resolution, you had to drop your frame rate to 30 frames to get the 4K native resolution. And as someone like myself who is playing through the game again on a PlayStation 5 Pro on a 4K TV, I have to say the visual improvement is insane. That PSSR pisser technology is working wonders for Rebirth. Now, there are some things it can't do, like it can't fix the texture pop-in issue. That's really an Unreal Engine issue that hopefully they can figure out for Part 3, and I also assume that the PC version of Rebirth will probably have that issue fixed as well, because they'd be able to work with much more powerful hardware. But there are moments where even textures tend to look a little bit better on the Pro. Characters in general, the world, all of these things are so much more detailed, and I really saw it for the first time when I looked at Cloud. I swear Cloud has more hair now than he did in the base version of the PS5 version of Rebirth. His clothing, his armor, his weapons, his face are so much more detailed. Same thing with Barrett, Tifa, and Aerith and Red. And again, even the environments just look so beautiful because now they're in 4K, they're not blurry. And I think it was Maximilian Dude who described it as, you know, imagine someone who's not wearing glasses and they see things really blurry, and then they finally for the first time put a good pair of glasses on and they see everything clearly. That's kind of what it's like for Rebirth going from the base PS5 to the Pro model. It's just worlds more beautiful and a much clearer image. And what's insane is that, from my understanding, in the versatility mode for the Pro version of Rebirth, I think the resolution is somewhere around 1080p or 1200p, but because of the PSSR technology, it's boosting that resolution up to 4K. It's upscaling it essentially, which allows it to run at 60 frames because it's technically a lower resolution being upscaled. But the even crazier thing is that in that versatility mode, there is more detail on the characters, on their clothing, on the environment compared to the native 4K graphics mode on the base PS5 model. So somehow an upscaled 4K version of the game looks better than a native 4K version. It's super insane. It's visually beautiful, and I thought my eyes would eventually adjust to the Pro version, but I get to a new area, I see a new enemy, and my brain is just like, whoa, this is stunningly beautiful, which makes me super excited for Remake Part 3. Now up next, we talk about the possibility of a crossover between the 7 Remake trilogy and the very popular Final Fantasy XIV, and to get that info, we gotta move to Games Radar, where Hamaguchi gives us his thoughts on this entire situation. He would go on to say, I mean, obviously there's nothing specific planned at the moment, but I think it'd be a great idea. Yes. I mean, I get on very well with Yoshi myself. He means Yoshi P. We both trust each other greatly. We often get together and discuss things like the future of the Final Fantasy series, etc. So I think because we do work so well together, there's definitely a lot of things that could possibly come up along those lines. So yeah, I think it'd be really good. And this is something that Yoshi P has also brought up in the past, saying like maybe once the trilogy wraps up, they can do a really cool crossover with 7 Remake, which would be dope. Again, I don't play a lot of 14. I played just a very tiny bit a few years ago. I'm not much of an MMO person, but if there was some sort of cool crossover between the 7 Remake trilogy and the world of 14, I think that would potentially get me interested in wanting to check out 14 again just to see what they're offering. But MMOs are just so overwhelming to me that I don't know if I would, jump in. Now, speaking of Yoshi P has also brought up the fact that Square Enix and the dev teams really want to try and get their Final Fantasy games onto Xbox platforms. And we've covered a number of different interviews over the past few months where Yoshi P has talked about this. Well, now Hamaguchi-san himself is also talking about the possibility of bringing the 7 Remake trilogy to the Xbox. Hamaguchi would go on to say, in terms of Final Fantasy VII, there's nothing really we can say at the moment, but certainly I do want to bring the Final Fantasy VII and the Remake series to as many players out there as possible. So we want to create that situation, that environment where more players can play the games in future, and we want to look in that direction, which I think will happen. But when it comes to the 7 Remake trilogy, it's gonna have to debut on PlayStation first, fully wrap up, let the exclusivity expire, and then it can come fully to the Xbox and PC ecosystem. I would not be shocked if there's some sort of remastered trilogy that they put together where it has Remake, Rebirth, and Part 3 all cleaned up on PlayStation 5, Xbox platforms, which is even nuttier because apparently everything is an Xbox now. This microphone I'm speaking into is an Xbox, by the way. And of course, the ever important, ever growing with the young community, PC platforms. Now, Xbox in particular, I don't know if Xbox would be a massive game changer. We've covered in the past of how Square Enix wants to move away from exclusives and really get their games on every platform possible on day one, which is really best for these games. It helps more people get their hands on them. It helps recoup the budget for these games a lot faster, and the more people that get access to these games, the better. And what's really interesting about Xbox is that the Xbox brand has really changed over these past few years, and it's no longer Xbox the box, the console. Everything is now Xbox, and that's what Phil Spencer and Microsoft have been doing. They've taken that Xbox name, and instead of having it be solely a console, it now represents their ecosystem. Xbox is now Game Pass. You can play Game Pass pretty much everywhere now, whether it's a phone, a tablet, a computer, your Xbox console, your Samsung TV, it's everywhere. So when you take that into consideration and they do bring the 7 Remake trilogy to Xbox, I think it'll be a situation where it's available to buy on Xbox, but they might cut a deal with Square to get it into Game Pass, which would allow more people to play it. I don't really quite know how that would work with sales. I think it would mostly just be a massive check from Microsoft to get that game into their ecosystem, which would then probably help kind of boost Square Enix just a little bit. And that's really where the industry is going, and Hamaguchi even talks about that, about how, back in the day, you used to be able to release your game on one platform, everyone gravitated to it, and it would be a success. But nowadays, there are just so many many options out there, so you kind of in turn have to get that game onto as many platforms as possible in front of as many people as possible. And we will end on, what does Hamaguchi think about the future of the Final Fantasy franchise? So in a previous interview, he talked about wanting to revisit the world of Final Fantasy VII after this trilogy is wrapped up. They could potentially focus on new characters, they could do a spin-off, they could bring back Cloud and the party. We don't really know, but we speculated on, what it would be cool to see them do. So now Hamaguchi is talking about how he's been spending 10 years working with the same development team to work on 7 Remake, and what could possibly be next for them after they wrap up this trilogy, assuming they don't return to the world of FF7. Hamaguchi says, "My team has developed so much together, grown so much, gotten so much experience and knowledge while working on the remake trilogy. We're still working on the 3rd game. That's not finished yet. We still have to get that out the door." He laughs. "When we get to the end of the trilogy, in terms of what the next project that the team works on, I really don't know yet at all. It could be the next numbered Final Fantasy. It could be a completely different brand. We might start up a completely new brand, but whatever it is, I'm incredibly excited to work on that and see what we can do with that knowledge we've built up. But certainly, considering that background, my team has been together, the Final Fantasy VII team, for about a total of 10 years, maybe. To go through this whole trilogy project, slowly building up our experience and our know-how, the team has seriously learned so much and grown so much during that period. So I think when we finally do bring the trilogy to a close and get the final game out, we'll be in a really great position to move forward and do something even greater. And that experience is just so key to that, and that we managed to build that up by staying together." So the world really kind of is Hamaguchi and their team's oyster, CS1. These are the people behind the 7 Remake trilogy, and as much as it would be cool to see them return to FF7 and bring those characters back, or potentially introduce new characters, the possibility of them handling the next mainline Final Fantasy is also super exciting, and we touched on that in a video from a few months ago where we talked about, what's next for Final Fantasy? What is the next mainline Final Fantasy going to be, and who could potentially develop it? And one of my options was Hamaguchi in CS1. For this team to have been together for 10 years, they're like a well-oiled machine. They know each other like the back of their hands. They know what each person can specialize in, what each person's strengths and weaknesses are. And I think if you take that chemistry in combination with that incredible battle system from the 7 Remake trilogy and the world building that they've been able to do, I really would love to see them do Final Fantasy XVII. And I think Square Enix sees how valuable this section in particular is, CS1, and how good they are at crafting these games. And I think they would also have all the faith in the world in letting Hamaguchi take the reins and be the director of the mainline Final Fantasy franchise to see what him and his team could do with it. But whatever this team ends up doing, I'm really excited for it. I'm fully behind it because I know that as someone who has played their games, I trust their vision and I trust what they've been able to put together. And to me, it's been some really incredible stuff. I loved 7 Remake. I'm playing through Rebirth a 2nd time. I'll probably play through it a 3rd time. And just those systems that they've built and crafted are so good that it would be a waste not to let them improve upon all of that stuff in future games. And when I think about Final Fantasy as a whole, obviously right now it's kind of in a weird spot where the franchise isn't super mega popular. It's still popular enough. Sales haven't been necessarily great for Final Fantasy 16 or 7 Rebirth, but I think once Square Enix kind of gets through these growing pains of restructuring and ending the exclusivity contracts and allowing their games to debut on PlayStation, on Xbox, on PC, and on Switch all in one go, I think they'll be able to recover and kind of build themselves back up again, which I think just kind of creates a platform for the next Final Fantasy to just kind of bounce off of and, potentially become a much bigger success. And when I think about Final Fantasy as a whole, I think it's in really good hands with people like Naoki Hamaguchi and Yoshi P kind of leading the charge, while still having people like Yoshinori Kitase, Tetsuya Nomura, and Kazuhige Nojima kind of at the back, just kind of supporting them. So it's a really great team of people that know what they're doing and know how to craft some really awesome stuff. And I'm super excited to see what they do next after this trilogy wraps up. So with that being said, that is the video. Let me know in the comments down below, what did you guys think of the topics that we covered in today's video? Specifically, what are you guys hoping to see Hamaguchi and CS1 do after this trilogy wraps up? Do you want to see them come back to the world of FF7, or perhaps tackle the next mainline Final Fantasy. And if you want a little bit more info on that, I will leave a link to the Future of Final Fantasy video that we did a couple of weeks ago, just kind of spitballing on who could take over the franchise, what the next Final Fantasy could potentially be, if you guys would like to check that out. I am Curious Corduroy. I will see you guys in the next video. Please remember to always be excellent to one another.